Hey everyone, this is the Canadian Libertarian. Today I'm going to be having a conversation with a gentleman goes by the name of Sev or Severin K. He's a gentleman that has an account on Minds.com. If you haven't been to Minds.com, well, what are you waiting for? It's a great alternative social media platform. You know, we all see the controversies that are happening on Facebook and stuff. Beautiful thing about some of these alternative platforms is you don't have to worry about the marketing and ads, and you can actually have a presence on there and not have your presence manipulated by algorithms or have your voices suppressed by individual actors within these corporations. So I'm very happy to reach out to people like Severin here. But the main point of what we're going to be talking about today is I had watched a video of his where he had suggested that he's leaving classical liberalism and the right, which is something I wanted to get some clarity on thought and clarity on the premises and what the position and the reasoning behind what he's suggesting. Because I would already preface that the right and classical liberals aren't exactly the same thing. Anyways, Severin, I just wanted to introduce you real quick. If you just wanted to go ahead and run down basically, what the reasoning was, just to give us a short summary of what the reason is behind that video that you put out.
Okay, now for that video, I was originally intending to put out a different video on that date and time called "Is Equality Possible?" So just to point out that this was actually not supposed to be made for that date and time, but I'd been exploring what the left was actually saying, and watching various left-wing YouTubers who aren't crazy SJWs, people like Kyle Kalinske, and I even wanted to look at what some of the far left was saying because I think they thought something wasn't entirely right with the way they were being represented. And as an aside, when you mention classical liberalism and the right, they're not the same thing. I think in a certain understanding, they're not the same thing. Now, what classical liberalism, I think you know this part. Classical liberalism refers to the liberalism of old, which was basically free markets, private property, and all that stuff.
Right, and individualism was basically the core tenet, and yes, property rights. Classical liberalism would have been basically an early iteration of what people today would consider libertarianism.
Yes, it would be, and at the time that would have been considered the left. But here's the thing about the right, The main thing about the right is that the right wants to basically preserve the current social system and institutions and values. We currently live in a capitalist society with private property and individualism, at least the liberal understanding of individualism as its foundations. And when you think about it, the classical liberals, they don't want the fundamental systemic change that people like the socialists would, or even the fascists want. So it's like, the fascists don't really want much change. They just want to preserve the system by any means necessary, while basically throwing liberty on the fire. What I'm basically saying is that the classical liberals, they basically want to preserve things as they are, but obviously roll back some of the nonsense that they see, and they think that will make things better. People like Sargon and V sort of fit this bill.
Okay, actually, yeah, before we go on, I just wanted to, because the most important thing I have found that is of paramount importance when you're going to have a discussion with other people is it should be predominantly about the ideas, not people, because as you suggest, this is the problem where you get into this collectivism stuff, and when you're talking about people in a collective, so when you're talking about, you know, ideologies or preferential behaviors in, as far as whether they consider themselves on the political left or the right, is, you know, what you ultimately end up with, and because we're, you know, we have infinite opinions on basically everything, so there is no such thing as an identifiable right that's everyone believes in everything everyone says that identifies on that side of the political spectrum or those on the left. So that's why, to me, the most important thing that we should do, you or I or anyone else that wants to delve into this space and bring about, you know, intellectual ideas, is let's forget about people, let's just talk about the ideas. Because I understand what you're saying, and I would be able to point out to basically everyone that you brought up in your video. I can guarantee you that I could find something or multiple things in everything everyone is suggesting, and as far as their own personal opinions and their subjective opinions regarding their ideological preferences, I would have disagreements probably with every one of them. But to me, the most important thing that we have to get to is the reason why the classical liberals, well, post-Enlightenment era, the point of making things about the individual, right? The point of classical liberalism was to take all of our opinions outside the realm of collectivism and put it into the hands and the minds of individuals. Because once we're thrown into a collective, you know, like even myself, I identify as a libertarian, but I always stress that I'm a philosophical libertarian. I don't like to delve into the political fray. Now, if people want to talk politics, I can talk politics. But to me, I would neither, well, I've never had nothing to do with the political process, nor would I ever want to, because I understand what the political process represents. It's basically just mob rule, or, you know, collective groupthink, where people use their particular ideology as a means through the political realm to impose it on the rest of the people in any particular geographical landmass or society. So to me, it's about the idea of the individual, because the minute you put anything in the realm of the collective, is like, even when people say, you know, people's rights, even when people say, oh, it's all about the people, well, that's a term that it sounds good in theory, but in practice, there's no such thing as the people. Because even in my own personal family, you know, there's only, like, I have me and my wife, and we have 2 sons, so there's 4 of us. But that would still be considered a small group or a collective. But even within that small group or collective, we have varying opinions, preferences, and areas in our mind where we want to do things maybe a little bit different from each other. So to me, the most important thing we should be talking about when we're talking about any of these things is, are you talking about, so when you're talking about Sargon, these people, are you talking about, because Sargon obviously is not running for political office. Now, if he was, then your criticisms I would take more seriously, because then it's someone, because when you run for political office, basically what you're doing, you know, government is a direct representation of a monopoly of force or violence. So if someone wants to go into the realm and take over that, you know, invisible gun in the room, which is what government represents, then basically what they're suggesting to me is they want to use the political means, which is direct threat of force or violence, to impose their ideas. That's where we can get into some, you know, having some of these debates and conversations and recognize each other as adversaries. But outside of that, outside of working or functioning within the political realm, whether it's you know, Sargon, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, if we're just people that are discussing ideas and we're not using the political realm to impose our ideas on each other, I think this is actually the area, and which is why I was a little bit concerned with what you were saying, because this is actually the area where we can talk. This is actually the area where we're not using force as a means to an end. So I think we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Now, I understand that you probably have issues and take issues with some of the things that they present, and this is what we're going to try to cover in this conversation. But like I said, I just wanted to cover that first and foremost, that it has to be about ideas, not people.
Yeah, I would actually like it to be about ideas as well, although reality does not seem to pan out that way sometimes. Now, you mentioned Sargon. I bring these people up because they are self-identified classical liberals. They are essentially adherents to that ideology or philosophy, or however you would like to describe classical liberalism. But interesting, you should bring up wanting to run for political office. I think Sargon has floated the idea of doing his liberalists movement as a political party, or maybe I've heard that doing the rounds. But there is a video clip that you can find in which Jordan Peterson has expressed interest in running for political office, and he said that he has been interested in politics and has said that he since about 14, and yeah, it is out there, and I don't want to misrepresent Peterson, but I remember him saying something along the lines of he wanted to involve his political views in his practice or teaching, or I don't know. I've probably misinterpreted that part. But I was talking about it on my Discord server, which is how I came to that clip.
Right. Well, okay, but as it is now, like I say, if there is ever a time where these people do delve into the political fray, then that's somewhere where I think that, you could definitely put forth and present, a counter argument or a rebuttal. But as it stands today, I know what you're saying because I heard Jordan Peterson say that himself, that he's been interested. But just like myself, now early on in my life, basically through ignorance, I didn't concern myself with politics. But I think what we all have to understand is whether you choose to actively participate in politics or concern yourself with politics, because it's a direct representation, like I say, of that monopoly of force or violence, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, politics plays an active role in your life, because politicians and political parties and the government has an overarching and active role in how your life socially and economically is dictated. So as much as even people like myself, I prefer to rise above politics and discuss ideas. To me, that's the thing, because culture, I think, is upstream. Politics is downstream of culture. If the culture is healthy, then politics will follow suit. But if the culture is in disarray, well, then that's where the political realm becomes the central focal point, because like I said, then it's just people looking to use that force to impose their ideas on others. Now, because of that, as much as I would wish to avoid politics, and I guess that goes back to the saying I heard growing up, and now that I'm an older person and understand, it's the worst thing anyone could tell you is don't ever discuss politics or religion. Really, when people are telling you that, they're saying your opinion doesn't matter because there's rulers that will say what's got to be done, and you don't want to discuss that because as soon as you start discussing politics, then it will cause controversy or arguments. But you know what? It's avoiding that controversy or those arguments is what has allowed, the political class, the ruling class, to become so entrenched and so dominant in all of our countries. So as much as and I'm sure Jordan Peterson, he didn't go into politics, he went into psychology, and a lot of people, the reason why we chose to stay out of that is because I think most of us recognize, I know myself, there's been times where it's like, geez, I would like to jump into this so that I could do, but it's like, no, I don't want to be the kind of person that delves into politics, because that means I want to use force as a means to an end. Me, I would rather use, my speech, language, talk about universal ethics, proper habits, behaviors, morality. Those are the things that I want to do. Just like when I raised my kids, I could have been an authoritarian dad, but instead I wanted to lead by example, give them the proper intellect and knowledge so that they would become well-adjusted, independent individuals. So we, as much as we understand that politics is going to play an active role in part in our life because there's such thing as governments, I think as long as most of the people that you're talking about, as long as they stay out of the political realm, then we are still genuinely function within the area of ideas. And as long as we're functioning within the realm of ideas, then we shouldn't look at each other as adversaries. Now, like I said, if you're a politician, I know automatically that you're an adversary because you're someone that wants to impose your will on me through the political means. So there I can understand where you have apprehension and you can give people, as much a hard time as you wish to, and I'll be right there on your side. But as long as these people, like I say, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, or anyone else that you brought up, as long as we're just functioning in the realm of ideas and discussing ideas, and we're willing to discuss ideas, I think this is really the only place, the only area that we can function to hopefully create a better place for anyone, regardless of your preferences or regardless of your ideology.
Well, and it's but my main criticism, the reason I criticized them so much in my vid was probably because they're famous enough that a lot of people take them seriously. A lot of a lot of people basically consider them to be the smart people. People like, yeah, these beacons of rationality, not unlike those crazy SJWs. Never mind the fact that as I learned, Dave Rubin has been taking money from the Koch brothers, others, and I was concerned about that because it's obviously affects his integrity in some way, and people like the Progressive Voice have been pointing this out recently, and Kyle Kalinske has called Rubin out too over this sort of thing. I mean, and it's no coincidence that his views began to change as soon as after he got the money. Like Dave Rubin used to vouch for Bernie Sanders until he got the Koch brothers money. Then he said, and now he says, I would much rather vote for Trump than crazy Bernie. Never mind the fact that Trump just attacked Syria.
Right, but and let me just interject real quick though, because I think what you're referencing now, and this is the problem that I think we got to get some clarity of mind and clarity of the terms too, is the problem that I think all people, whether they identify as conservative, classical liberal, or individualist, or libertarian, it is the overarching issue that we all have and we all share. The one commonality is, and what Bernie Sanders represents, and not saying he's a bad guy or anything, but when you talk about socialism, and there are, and this is the thing we have to understand too, is there are defined meanings to these words and terms that we use, and socialism is basically the collective taking over the means of production, the people, right?
Well, yeah. Socialism is about handing control of the means of production over to the workers, and when they say seize control of the MOP, they mean hand it over to democratic ownership. Sorry if I interrupted.
No, but no, that's no problem. No worries, man. But this is the problem. Like I say, this is where we got to clear things up. Because when you say things, and like I said, when I was in my younger years and didn't understand things properly, I used to believe some of this stuff as well. But this is the thing. Once you've thought through these things critically, and you've done it objectively without any ideology steering the direction of your mind, is what does the people represent, or like the labor class or the working class, which is basically what socialism is. There is no such thing as a collective, because like I just suggested earlier on in the video, even in a very small group of just a family, which a collective of social, like people that live in a country or a province or a community, any setting, there is no, like, we are not autonomous robots. We're not the Borg. So we are all individuals within a collective, and you would never find, no human being could ever show me where you can find every individual within a collective has equality of competence, intelligence, morality. That does not exist. So when you say things, this is the problem, and this is why individualism has mattered so much post-Enlightenment era, is because the only way you can hold anyone responsible and accountable for their actions is by acknowledging the individual actor. When you use the collective mentality, then you basically give very bad people this cover, this umbrella, where they can pretend that they represent, just, I mean, think about it, all the socialist countries around the world, every time they've ever practiced full-on socialism, they put forth the very exact same premises, or sometimes there are some small discrepancies, but it's all about giving power to the people. But like, once again, there is no such thing as a concept of people. Just like in a forest, there's the forest, but in reality, that forest is just a representation of individual trees, and every one of those trees, is a distinct characteristic of the landscape, and they're not all the exact same. Even two trees of the same species are going to have differences and variances. So the problem that I always have with any collective ideology, whether it's socialism, communism, or fascism, they all basically suggest to sacrifice the individual for the greater good. And the greater good, once again, is a representation of what? What does the greater good even represent? There's no such thing as a greater good, because to suggest there's a greater good would suggest that most people are good. But that's, that's not necessarily the case, because most people care about their own self-interest as much as a lot of people, whether they're from the right or left. They like to say that they're all about benevolence. But at the end of the day, we all ultimately, to survive as a species, as an individual, you have to worry about and you have to make your own individual self a priority. Otherwise, if you don't make yourself a priority, then you are now just a slave or a sacrificial animal for some concept of a greater good or a deity or the state. So the issue, I think, and what I'm trying to clarify here is the issue I think most people that would identify as classical liberals predominantly would be, and individualists for sure, is it's all about at least acknowledging the individual. Not that the individual is just a cog in the gear, in the machinery of the state or the greater good. Because once again, that's if you place individuals in the realm that they're only as important as their collective, well, they're easily sacrificed for that collective. And the collective, whether they identify for some right-leaning ideology or a left, you and I as individuals will all be serfs, subjects, and slave to this greater good. So, like I say, whether it's fascism or communism or socialism, to me, they're all the destruction of the individual and the destruction of actual freedom.
There's a thing that I know. There are things that I notice about the right and the left, like the social left, and I think the idea that the social and I think this is, and I do agree with you that there is no that I do agree with you that is that there is, in the sense that there is no collective on its own. I think even a socialist can probably tell you that that a collective is essentially made up of individuals. What I notice on the right is that they believe in the concept of the atomized individual. Now the idea of the atomized individual, it's something that I first heard of from another libertarian whose name is Michelle Catlin, who I basically criticized in a video that I made in February, and it was in response to a video in which she promoted the idea of demographic strategy, in which she basically said white people should vote as a minority, basically, and that will guarantee the right-wingers victory.
Yeah, see, to me, that when it comes to race, obviously all people have in-group preferences, but to me the race doesn't matter. That's the part, that's where I, just like you, that's where we share some commonalities, is I will pivot away from anyone that gets into identity politics, because that just is, it's a race to the lowest common denominator, which is a destruction, once again, of the individual, which is, once again, to me, just another form of forced subjugation or slavery. So the right-wingers that want to use the identitarian mindset, or what you call the outright or identity politics, basically the same idea or the same concept as their far-left counterparts, these are the people that I think me and you both would share a common concern with, the fact that these people are trying to, once again, but see, this is like what I was saying at the very beginning of the video. I'm about ideas, not people. So to me, I don't care what your skin color is. I don't care about, your background, your heritage. If you as an individual person, if you understand that, like what I suggest, like what libertarian, the philosophy of liberty means, like non-aggression principle and property rights, because property rights entails like me. The property doesn't necessarily mean a thing that I bought or that I built, but I claim self-ownership as a free individual. So my property is my body. So for me, as to be a free human being, my body has to be mine and it's free. Like I have to have complete autonomy and control over my actions and the products or fruits of my labor or my intellect. So I reject far right and far right or far left both, because to me they're both collectivists. They both represent the collective ideology. They both are suggesting that the individual doesn't really mean anything. It's about their collective ideology or their in-group preference. This is the part, like I say, where I think people like me and you, and I think even like some socialists, some communists, some anarchists, I think this is the area that we all would agree on. This is kind of why I want to do these videos, because I actually firmly believe that people that are against the state or this overarching premise of using force or subjugation as a means to an end, I think we all should be able to come together and just acknowledge at some point, hopefully, that you're never going to convince me to believe exactly what you believe, and I'm never going to convince you to believe exactly what I believe. All that we can ask from each other is to at least accept that there are baseline rules that all humans have to function under if we're going to exist peacefully. And that's, like I say, the non-aggression principle, which is I don't get to initiate force or violence or theft towards you. And like I said, property rights, so self-ownership. I own myself, nobody owns me, and nobody owns any product or fruits of my labor or my intellect. So as long as we can agree to that, like I say, this is the part where I think a lot of us can actually come together, because I don't want to impose, like if you don't believe in all the areas of libertarianism, at least if you adhere to the fundamental first principles of, do not use force or violence against someone else, I think we can all live peacefully in any geographical landmass or any society. It's just the pretense of not using force against each other, which is where the political realm functions. The political realm, the government, is that direct representation. So as long as you and I aren't looking to use government to force our ideas on each other, then this is the area that we should be able to come together.
Yeah, yeah. And now I think there's something I should probably ask you, and it should give you an insight as to one of the reasons is that I've basically decided that I'm not a right winger. Now, something I should ask: have you noticed that there's a trend in which people who call themselves libertarians have started to go down the alt-right path, whether it's adopting the ideology or using the rhetoric, or, as I was saying, flirting with demographic strategy?
Yes, I have noticed some of that. Even certain people, and this is where the pragmatism kicks in, and it's a difficult realm once again, because we all understand. Well, especially like people like Stefan Molyneux and such. There are some people that basically actively supported Donald Trump. Now, my first initial reaction to that was, wait a minute now, we've all been talking about how the political realm is terrible, and this, it's basically forced subjugation, but now we're delving back into the fray. Well, what's this? Let's try to be morally and philosophically consistent, which I have presented this counter argument on many posts that I've uploaded on my own social media platforms. But once I've heard it understood, so here's the thing, and I'm not giving anyone any carte blanche excuse for anything they do, but we all have to recognize this. The reality of the fact is, no matter how pure you are in your mind and what it means to be a free human being, we do unfortunately function in the realm, in the world today. There are such thing as political parties. There are such thing as left-right ideologies in regards to politics, and whether we like it or not, there are people that are going to take over and assume that big gigantic gun in the room, which is the representation of government. So what people like, whether it's Stefan Molyneux or some other people as far as supporting Trump, is, I think it was a difficult decision, and I'm thinking he's probably regretting it now, especially with this whole intervention into Syria now.
Yeah, they probably are. If they're not saying, "Oh, it's 2,000 dimensional chess."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but see, this is the problem though, is we can all stay as purists, and like I say, I've spent most of my time being just a purist as far as what being a free human being represents. But if we all just stand on the sidelines, and this is something I've had other people have to kind of point it out to me, if we're all just standing on the sidelines and allowing the bad actors to keep constantly taking over the realms or the helm of power without at least throwing something in there to disrupt the establishment. So to me, it's not that I don't think anyone should actually think that Trump is going to, Trump is not going to change, the culture of the U.S. or make peace, or no one man can. I think the biggest thing I think the clarity of mind or the clarity of thought that should have been put forth and presented even more forthright from other people. Stephen Molyneux, he explained it best, but a lot of people that jumped on the Trump train didn't elaborate and expand on the reasoning behind it. But in reality, if you just said, hey, I just wanted to throw a little bit of something in this, or to disrupt this current paradigm, this current system, and I just don't know where else to turn, because we all at least understood that, Hillary Clinton was going to be bad. Well, I mean, and even Bernie Sanders, as much as he would have been a disruptor, well, I wouldn't even been as pissed off if Bernie Sanders, but once again, Bernie Sanders or Trump, neither one of them are going to actually affect real change, because none of them are speaking with logically concise language. They're speaking at both sides of the mouth, because there's no such thing as caring about the poor if you're promoting collectivism or socialism, because you just can't, because there's a lot of poor people that have suffered under socialist or collective regimes. So I'm not a fan of the political realm, but at least the people that you're pointing out, if you know what they stand for as a person, then you can find some areas where you can come to agreement with. Now, you can still point out, and I'll back you 100% when you say, well, you shouldn't have chose to support Trump. See, like, you should have been more, consistent. But at the same time, whether Trump came to power, someone was going to take over the helm of power in the United States. And I just think it was just a matter of playing that game of the lesser of evils. And while we have this time in the information age to present our proper ideas and proper philosophy to the people, well, somehow we got to try to, disrupt the progress of these authoritarian collectivists. So by all right, like I say, I completely support you in any arguments or any problems or issues you take with people that chose to support political parties or political actors, because once again, that's basically, you are, if a person is philosophically or intellectually honest, supporting any political party is inadvertently going against your own instincts as a libertarian. You're not supposed to use force or violence against other people, because the political realm is all about force and violence. So I get you with that. But once again, this is where we got to step back from the people and just figure out what's the right ideas. And I still believe in my heart, in my core, that the two fundamental principles of classical liberalism or libertarianism, those are still things that we need as the basis, as the foundation to start from any societal construct. So, like I say, non-aggression principle. Every one of us, put it this way, if me and you were living side by side as neighbors, we would all deal with each other, unless you're not the kind of person I think you are, but I believe you are. I think we would all deal with each other on the voluntary means. You wouldn't, you wouldn't try to use force against me, nor would you try to steal from me, I don't believe.
No, I absolutely wouldn't. I'm a pretty nice guy in real life.
Yeah, I don't doubt that for a minute. So this is what I mean. So I think as long as we both agree, or everyone agrees, and you don't even have, if you don't want to call it libertarianism, if you want to call it anarchism, I'm cool with that. Just as long as we all understand that we don't have any pretense of authority over each other. As long as we understand that, like I say, we could live. I can totally picture myself, if we all adhere to those two fundamental principles, the first principles and the basics of what it is to be a free human being, is to be free of force, coercion, and theft. And the flip side of that, which is property rights, that I own myself, and by extension anything that I build or anything that I create as an intellectual endeavor. If we can adhere to just those two very basic fundamentals, which are universally consistent, completely moral, non-hypocritical, then I think, like I say, I think even people say they want to set up like a socialist endeavor, I'd say, hey, you go right ahead and do that. If you want to set up an area of Canada, somewhere where you just want to have a bunch of people that believe in the socialist mentality or the socialist ideology, then you go right ahead and do that. And you know what? You should be free to do that. There should be no one to tell you that you cannot do that. Just like people that want to do
that.
Right, just like people that want to, if you want to create a commune somewhere, if you all want to agree to just, do the division of labor and not have any money as a means for barter exchange, or if you want to do communism, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're not forcing it on me, hey, do your communism. Same with libertarians. Libertarians, by definition, are not trying to impose their ideas. Philosophical libertarians. Now, political libertarians is a different thing, because just like socialists or communists, once you delve into the political fray, then your premise, the very premise of your ideology, gets thrown out the window, because now you're looking and seeking to use force as a means to an end. So a genuine socialist, if you want to do it, like I say, buy up a bunch of land, or a bunch of you buy a section of land and you live as socialists somewhere, do it. Communists, do your thing. Libertarians, capitalists, whatever, agorists, anybody. Is, like I say, the only thing that matters most to me, and this is what the free market of ideas is all about, and the free market as far as the economy is all about, is freedom of choice and competition. So with freedom of choice, you have the option. So you don't have to be forced into a one-size-fits-all, which is what government basically does, whether it's liberal, conservative, in Canada, New Democratic Party. It's still, once they get in power, they still want to use a one-size-fits-all, whereas I don't want to be shoved into a box or a collective. I want to be a free human being.
I think with politics, the main problem is not that people don't have principles. I mean, obviously, plenty of people enter politics with principles in mind, but the problem is, well, one, when you're in politics, you find that you have to work within the system, which is the ultimate problem with someone like Trump or Sanders. They would still have to work within the establishment. And the other problem is that, well, people inevitably respond to incentives. And I think this is one of the ways in which the Marxists were right. People do respond to incentives. And as a way of explaining where I think these sort of right libertarians who are headed down the alt-right pipeline, as a way of explaining where I think they might go, I think I should tell you about David Graeber's parable of the divided island. It's like, take an island inhabited by both anarcho-communists and anarcho-capitalists. They draw a line between the island, one side inhabited by the far-left anarcho-communists, and one side inhabited by the capitalists. The laborers who were working for the capitalists in the anarcho-capitalist island suddenly start moving over to anarcho-communist island, to anarcho-communist land, and because the ANCOMs are basically offering them a better deal, like the labor theory, like a society organized according to the labor theory of value, who Marxist principles that might give them a better deal in their eyes. Suddenly the ANCAP side starts losing workers, which leaves them to two options. Either reform the system, which basically turns them into socialism light, or try and keep the people in the ANCAP side through manipulation or control, sort of thing. What I intend to say through this is that I believe that some of these right libertarians are in a position where in a free marketplace of ideas, I think people will eventually drift to the left because of the way capitalism is now, and the way Marxists will call this late capitalism. And so the way I see it, I think eventually people on the right will need big government in order to basically keep their ideas alive. So I sort of think, not so much the liberty aspect, but the private property aspect and the capitalism aspect.
Okay, I just wanted to just clarify a couple things, because you brought up two very important terms that I think needs to have some clarity of thought here. So the first one was, you said right libertarians. Once again, When you're talking to the political realm, that's to me. I mean, they can use that premise, I guess, but because there's logical fallacies and contradictions in their mind, there are people that are just it. You know, it's just like when you're talking about, and the other aspect, what you're saying about capitalism. If you understand the meanings of these words, none of the like. There's first of all, libertarianism is an idea. There's no such just because there's opportunists. What it is political opportunists use, areas of all ideologies, just like some of these leftist collectivists, authoritarian collectivists, use some of the the good concepts or ideas of Marxism for their devious deeds. Well, so do people on the right. So to me, there's no such thing as right or left as far as libertarianism. Now, there are people that want to identify as libertarian because then they think that they can get the benefit of using the libertarian philosophy for their own political ideas. But in reality, like when a political libertarian is saying that, oh, I'm a libertarian, it's like, well, wait a minute. So if you believe in the non-aggression principle and private property and you're running for government, well, how do you square that round peg? Because you're seeking to use force as a means to an end towards other people. And as a libertarian, that's a contradiction. So when people identify, if they identify as a libertarian, and they say left or right, then you might as well just acknowledge that they are someone that's just using sophistry and political language to trick you into thinking that they care about personal freedoms and individual liberty. But in reality, they may want to shrink the size of the state for someone that they perceive as their counterparts, but they obviously want to be a representation of that gun in the room, which automatically, like I say, contradicts the very premise of what libertarian ideas represent. So first, when you're talking about politics, you can do the left or right, but once again, that's to me, that's just people trying to function through an ideology in their mind where they're trying to use force against other people. Whereas the idea of libertarianism, the idea of freedom, there is no such thing as right or left. Just like with math, there's no such thing. If I say 2 + 2 is 4, there's no such thing as a right-leaning mathematician or a left-leaning mathematician. The simple fact that 2 + 2 is 4 is just, it's a construct that we invented as human beings, but it can be proven to be universally consistent, just like the non-aggression principle and property rights can be proven to be universally consistent and principled where that nobody has any pretense of authority over each other. So that's first and foremost. And then the other thing I wanted to cover is when you talk about capitalism. Once again, capitalism as defined in any dictionary and is basically just private, like people, private citizens that start businesses and they are in complete control of their business. Now, today, what you're talking about today, the capitalism that we all function under today is not even genuine capitalism. It's what's called the third way, or some people like to call it crony capitalism. Some people call it fascism. There's actually some areas of it because the third way has incorporated all the collective ideologies. So you could even say there's communist aspects of capitalism nowadays. You can say there's socialist aspects. Well, perfect example, me living in Canada, we still consider ourselves a capitalist society, but in reality, the government now confiscates 44% even of the average taxpayer's income. So you're almost halfway there onto full socialism. So what these third way, what they did, what the central planners types have done over the years is they realize that they need the capitalists. They need the people that produce the wealth and income in society. But the socialists are more than willing to allow some capitalism to exist because that's how they can lay claim to a portion of that to use for themselves. So capitalism that we function under today does not exist. This is called state capitalism, which, like I say, crony capitalism, fascism. That, okay. But they've all been captured, whether it's through the central bank, corporation. That's another thing. I hear a lot of people on the left, they say, oh, I hate corporations, but we need the government to go against corporations. To me, it's like you're not working through proper logic in your brain if you say you need the government to go against corporations, because the very term corporation, if you look it up, and like I say, hey, we live in the information age here, so all this information is freely available. Corporation is a direct form of government legislation that took an actual business, and instead of a business owner that would be completely responsible for his business, the term corporation reduced that liability to the point where now there is no liability for the owner, as we've seen when the bailouts happened. You know, when they forced taxpayers or the unborn to bail out these corporations, it was the government that did it. None of these corporations had any pretense of authority. GM, like in Canada, GM or Ford or the Royal Bank of Canada or Scotiabank, none of them had any pretense of authority to force me or my kids to bail them out when they got themselves in massive trouble economically. It was government that allowed that to happen because, once again, legislation, they created the legislation where they created this bailout regime and bailed out the banks. So if you're going against corporations, you have to, by definition, be against government because government created the very term definition. Without government creating the term corporation, they're just businesses, companies, stores. And if there's just businesses, companies, and stores, then nobody can escape liability for anything they do.
Yes, I've heard this argument that oh, it's not capitalism, it's corporatism, which is another thing. Now, one thing I also noticed is that the people who defend capitalism, whether for ideological reasons or not, they will basically say capitalism has lifted 700 million people out of poverty, and something like that. But they will also say that what we have in America, Britain, the United States, isn't really capitalism, and it's corporatism. And right now I'm in the mindset where I think, can you really have it both ways? I don't think you can.
Well, yeah, you can't. Well, no, actually, let me just interject real quick. So let's say you, as a business owner, right? Let's say you started a business tomorrow, and you created, a company that makes widgets or whatever you're gonna do. Now, you as a person, because you have to function, if you live in any Western society, you have to function under the paradigm that we live in. So you have to get regulatory permission. You have to get your license through the government. You have to have, everything has to go through government. So you inadvertently have to function within a quasi-fascist regime to even start up a business in any Western society today. Now, because the government gets to have regulatory capture and dictate and control how you can run your business, you as an individual person or a business owner, you might have all good intentions and we're seeking to help people. And let's say your business did become profitable and it flourished and you did help a lot of people. At the same time, there is that overarching area where the government can basically pick winners or losers. They can take portions of your income without your permission. They can use that portion of your income to even help your counterparts or your competition. So there is no, like I say, because once again, we have to function within the fact that me and you are speaking English, the only reason why we can speak English with each other and know what we're saying is because we understand the defined meanings of the words and terms we use. So capitalism, if you want to, even right now, I'll give you the time if you want, just go search on any dictionary. I don't care. You can pick whatever dictionary you want. Webster's, Oxford, the New Dictionary, Online Dictionary. They will all expressly explain to you what capitalism means. It's just people have businesses that are in the private hands of individuals. So to me, like, because you're a private individual, I think you should have every right to start a business. But because if you start a business, I'm not going to blame you because you have to function within a business that they're forcing you, which is because what government does because of regulatory capture, because they basically get to dictate how you can run your business. I'm not going to point to you, Severin, and say, oh, you're a bad person because you're a corporation. Because I don't think that you might very well be a bad person. And if I see that you're lobbying government for favors, then I can point to an actual instant where, this person's using the political means as a means to an end to impose their business model on someone else. Then I could genuinely give you criticism. But because every business today has to function in our quasi-fascist state, you basically either nobody starts a business or the people that do start business recognize instinctively that they have to function in this weird paradigm where they actually only have partial control over their business model because the government basically gets to dictate and control everything that happens. And even when you're talking about profitability with central planning and fiat currencies, they can even inadvertently affect your bottom line and your profits, because they can, as we see today, they're printing money like it's going out of style, which devalues the purchasing power of that currency, which obviously affects poor people worse, because it's the poor people that get that money usually, when it's already been devalued tremendously. But the capitalism, the actual capitalist, the person that just want to create an economic business model where they get to profit, and there's nothing wrong with profit. Profit just simply means that the person that had originally come up with the concept or the idea, they put on all the initial investment or come up with the concept themselves, so they want to be rewarded as such. Now, you can get into areas where you can, like I say, and this is where voluntary exchange or voluntary interaction comes into. If you work for a business or a corporation that makes billions of dollars worth of profits and pays their employees peanuts, then by all means, and that's once again voluntary interaction. I personally, myself, as an individual, I would never work for a company like that. And I think if most people held themselves to a standard such as what I would, then you wouldn't have as much of a concern, because once again, at least with corporations, even though it is by political decree, an institution created by the state, because like I say, corporation is literally a legislative act of the state. But those people that create businesses are not, it's not a one size fits all where you can say everybody that owns a corporation are just inherently bad people.
Yeah, I'm not so much a criticism of corporations are bad people, which probably wouldn't make sense if you are one of those people who believes that corporations aren't people, as some people on the left do. Those people do still exist. Now I have had arguments recently because I've been criticizing capitalism as a system, and what I tell them is there's a pretty simple way of telling which countries are capitalists. If it's a capitalist country if the means of production are privately owned for the purpose of profit, and where the worker has no means of production of his own, and I know how you might feel about using the term worker in this context, but bear with me. And where the worker has no means of production of his own, so they must sell their labor power in order to make a living. Much of the Western world pretty much operates under this sort of system.
Well, as far as that goes, when you were saying, like, the beautiful thing about it's funny because capitalism, like I say, because capitalism in its proper iteration and its proper meaning is just the private ownership. So you can be a worker. This is the thing, and me, I'm actually I'm a real human being. So I'm not using a hypothetical or an abstract idea. I'm a person that I was growing up in most of my life. I was just an employee, a worker in a business. But because we do have some segments of capitalists left in the West where you can actually go out and start your own business. It's not, everything's not completely controlled by the state. Like you say, there is still an area in Western societies where private property still exists and capitalism does somewhat exist, even though, like I say, it's that third way. It's not pure capitalism because, I still have to ask permission from the state to open a business. Otherwise, I'm considered in the black market. Now, which would be considered illegal under the government. But I actually did start, it's a small engine business that I had, and it was just to rebuild engines for ATVs, snowmobiles. I've always been into racing for many of my life. But when I started my business, because I am the kind of person that cares a whole lot about personal responsibility, personal accountability, I started my business as it's what's called a sole proprietorship. So I could have incorporated my company, but instead of incorporating it, I chose to do it as a sole proprietor because that leaves me as the sole owner of the company, and I'm solely and directly responsible for my company because, like I say, I don't want to offload any personal or any responsibilities or obligations to other people because It's my business, so I should be personally accountable and responsible for it. So this is something that can function under even our quasi-capitalist society today, which is basically state-directed capitalism, which is, like I say, more or less fascism. There is still some small area left where a person can start up a company. But like I say, for me to compete, now if my business had have expanded, it was a small business, so I never had to get into this concern. But let's say my business had have expanded and I had the ability to grow it even bigger. For me to do so, the government is going to force me to incorporate at some point. And if you get big enough, they'll actually even force you to go public with your company. So once again, this government, this regulatory capture, just like the fascists or even like people like Hitler. The biggest distinguishable difference between Hitler's his form of National Socialism and fascism, that was a direct contradiction to, like the Eastern Bloc kind of socialism, is he still allowed for private businesses. But the difference is...
Yeah. In fact, Hitler privatized a lot of industries, and that's actually the subject of my next video.
But it's a trick of it, but they say that, but it's, once again, it's linguistics, it's sophistry, because Hitler suggested, and that's the thing about these propagandists, is they know how to trick the human mind, right? This is what they do. So they said that we're going to allow for private ownership, but because the government, the state, the National Socialist Workers Union, they were the ones that had the overarching umbrella power or authority to dictate how those businesses could run. So just like me, let's say you started a business tomorrow and I was, let's call myself government. If I allowed you to start a business and you to actually retain control over the business, but I got to dictate how you ran the business, does it really matter the fact that you're the figurehead CEO of your business? If I'm the one that gets to tell you how to run your business, it doesn't really mean much just because I can use you as a figurehead and say, oh, look, it's a private individual that owns this company. In reality, you're just a figurehead because I'm the one that dictates how you can run your business.
Mm-hmm. Now,
that's the regulatory capture that a lot of people don't take into consideration, is the smart central planners, the authoritarians, they realize that all, and especially like you say, some of these people that would identify on the political right, let's say, they realize that, oh, this is a much better way to do it because it's an easier method. Just like back in the day when there used to be actual human ownership. We still kind of function as quasi-slaves. It's just that the sophists, the central planners, have figured out, let's tell the people they're free, even though we still control every area of their life. But hey, if you tell them they're free, they'll believe it. Just like they tell you that, a private business or a private capitalist venture, oh, it's in the hands of a private individual. It's bullshit because they all still control it all. So just because they say that we're free from slavery now, well, no, you're still a slave. If some government can lay claim or ownership of your productive wealth or your income, then you aren't really a free individual after all. You're still a slave just because they're not taking 100% of your income, which would be full-on slavery, although I've had to point this out to people in the past too. Even under real, genuine human ownership, slavery, the master still had to provide, if you were a productive slave and you picked a lot of cotton, if you got sick, your master would still pay for your health benefits to keep you, picking the slave, or they would still put a roof over your head to make sure that you were alive long enough to keep picking the cotton, and they would feed you so you made sure that you were alive long enough to pick the cotton. It's just a matter, like I say, and this is the part where you and I and all of us have to work through all the sophistry, all the bullshit, all the propaganda that we've been jammed into our head. And trust me, it's not just you, it's me. I've had to go through the same learning process that I think we all have to, is we got to get back to understanding the defined meanings in terms of the words we use. And that way we can talk to each other with clear and concise language, because as we keep regurgitating, and like I say, there's still times where I still have to work through my own clarity of thought. But if we keep regurgitating these talking points that the political activists or the political opportunists use, then we're not going to actually clear the obscurity of the fog that they've created in our minds. So that's why with this conversation, I'm trying to help you understand that make sure that the words you're using, every time you're using like a word like capitalism or anything, just make sure what was the original meaning of it, and does it really represent what we see today? Is that really a direct representation? Just like a socialist. A lot of people misrepresent socialists. Listen, I'll take it at face value that a socialist may not want to take over. If you go by the purity of their philosophy, then I'll accept that they're not necessarily looking to take over the government, let's say. But if they want to do it, then it has to still be done under the voluntary means. So if you're a socialist, a purist socialist, and you just want to put the power in the hands of the people so that the working class can control the means of production, I'm fine with that. But you can only if it happens under the fact that somebody in there voluntarily, so whoever come up with the idea for the business, because somebody had to, because there's no such thing as like a group of people that came up with an idea for a business. It's an individual, and then they might, suggest it to someone else. But there's somebody that come up with the original idea. And if that person that come up with the original idea says, okay, I don't want this to be just about me, I want to share collectively with a whole bunch of people because I recognize we need division of labor. If everybody enters into that contract voluntarily, then by all means do it.
I was going to address my view on what capitalism has become now. Before you were talking about everything else, which was totally fine, by the way. Hey, now what you call the third way. The technical name for it is basically neoliberalism, which, as you probably know, was developed in the 70s and was implemented in various Western countries by Reagan in America, Thatcher in my country. I don't know who. Not sure about Canada, so I won't weigh in. I don't know about Canadian politics that far back. But my view of neoliberalism is that I think it's an inevitable stage of development of the capitalist system. And one of the core tenets of neoliberalism is basically about perpetual economic growth. And you can't deny that you have these massive global corporations that effectively exploit the resources and/or labor from the third world, which has consequences over there, so to speak.
Yeah, but those things, they only happen through the political realm, through governments. So no private businesses can, like a private business in Canada, like I say, if I had a business here in Canada, I cannot go to any country and, whether I want to economically or socially enslave anybody, I can't go to any other country and do anything without the express permission of their central planning cohort, whatever they want to call their government. Some have dictators, single party rule, however they want to identify their political process. But basically, a business today, what functions with international trade, still has to function under government to government to government. So there's no such thing as free market capitalism. Capitalism exists as the underlying premise, but there's that regulatory capture, there's the socialists, there's the collectivists, there's the wealth redistribution aspect, and picking winners or losers. So, like I say, this is the thing that I think what would prevent and help people that have this conflict, because I've seen this and I've heard it espoused by so many people, and to me it's the most frustrating area. It's like, I have nothing against it. This is the part. Now, I started out, early on, because once we're starting to work through this stuff in our mind, is you hear, like I say, political dogma from other people. So then you think, oh, if you're a capitalist, oh, I gotta hate a socialist. If you're a socialist, all them damn capitalists. But once I start to understand these things from the philosophical aspect and understand, how to get from point A to B, the only thing, like I say, just like in my personal family setting, a small community, a province, a state, or ultimately the country, or ultimately the entire world. Basically, the two fundamentals, like I say, as long as everything is done under the voluntary means without using force forced subjugation, coercion, theft as a means to an end. It's an area that should allow the flourishment of many competing models. So, like I say, a perfect example, when people go to consume a product or a service, the beautiful thing about having competition, or even anything remotely resembling a free market, even though we don't function under genuine free market, there is at least enough of the market that's free enough that there is competition. So there is not like, in Canada or the UK or the US, we do have options as far as like the things we consume, the products or service. The only area where we don't have competition is in government. So this is the overarching umbrella that has this one size fits all approach. So we got to get away, as much as many people say, especially if you're on the left, when you see like there's people on the right, you say, oh, I got to use the government to go against the right. Or if the right wingers see that the left is advancing, maybe the laborers are advancing and getting too much power, they'll try to use the government to restrict or deny the left's ability to negotiate for maybe higher wages and stuff. The problem is, once again, is everyone is using that same gigantic gun in the room, which is government. And if you use force as a means to an end, even if you perceive that force as, well, it's just because they're going to point at me, well, I'm going to pick it up and point it at them, you're never going to get to a place where you actually have human freedom, because it's just a matter of everyone trying to seek out enough power to take over that helm, which is government, to force or impose their ideas on each other. People like I say, people like myself, people like you, why can't all of us, people that are anarchists, socialists, communists, whatever, however you want to define, even if you want to come up with your, even like some of these, like these gentlemen, what was his, Jacques or whatever, what's the futurist guy, you know what I mean? I can't think of his name right now.
Jacques Cousteau.
No, I don't know if that was his name, or Francesco or whatever his name was there. Remember, the futurist guy wanted to create a future utopian society kind of deal with moneyless. I forget his exact name anyway. Sorry for bringing that. But even, like I say, anyone else that wants to come up with even something that's totally different. The beautiful thing about having a free market, which is what free market, like capitalism, means. Now, capitalism, like I say, the problem with using the term capitalism is people look at that now as they automatically associate capitalism with the state. But if you understand what capitalism means in its pure sense, it's in absence of the state. So if you have real capitalism, which is just private actors functioning economically within any society, doesn't matter if you're a futurist, you want to create, or even like an Elon Musk that wants to create, everything that's all decentralized with technology. You can do all that under free market. It's just like, and I've used this expression or this association before in past videos. Let's say we were all playing a board game, because us functioning in a society is basically like all of us playing a board game. But my point is, rather than all of us sitting at one board game and playing a game where somebody keeps getting to change the rules all the time, why can't we have multiple people playing on multiple board games, and every one of us can see how those board games are playing out, and we can function in the area where you see, hey, look, they're doing it the right way because nobody's forcing their ideas on each other. And then we will automatically gravitate to the thing that's most beneficial to us. So if you're a communist or a socialist, if you see that there's a portion, let's say in Canada, there might be some area, let's say in Manitoba, where that seems to be very more conducive. The people that live in Manitoba seem to be more conducive based on their own personal preferences. They may be more conducive to collective socialist endeavor. Well, that's fine, because the beautiful thing about freedom of choice and freedom of association would mean that if I was the kind of person that believed in that particular ideology, well, then I would congregate and want to live and surround myself with those kind of people. And then we could all function in an area that we are of the same like mind. Even though we would have our own personal preferences in our own individual lives, at least we could function under the same social economic endeavors. Whereas if you were just more about pure capitalism, then like you were saying with that divided island, why is it that nobody, the problem I think with when you talk about that divided island is there's actors from both sides of those islands that seem to want to impose their ideas on each other. Why the heck can't you just have those two islands and let the free market of ideas flourish, so that the people that prefer socialism can go to the socialist side of the island, and the people that prefer capitalism go to the capitalist side of the island, and the people that don't want to have nothing to do with any of it, maybe there could be a part of the island where they can do their own thing.
Regarding the island, island, I think, as I was saying, it is more to do with the fact that the people in charge of the ANCAP side of the island have an interest in keeping as many of the labor class in that island as possible because well, their lifestyles are essentially made possible thanks to the working class. And this is something that I think every rich person deep down knows that they will never be as important as the people who apply the elbow grease and make it all happen. And this is why labor movements tend to be so active. When people in the working class unite, they make a difference, and it tends and it kind of gets on the capitalist class's nerves. So does it and especially when and such protests end up stalling certain functions like air travel and sort of thing. Mainly being hypothetical here. So the people in charge of the ANCAP side would have to do their best to maintain the status quo. It's not really because they didn't have any principles to begin with, but it's because they realize that in order to achieve this result, this is what would have to be done.
Well, the only thing with the scenario you're painting there, that where I have to say that it doesn't make any logical sense is, now as much as I recognize even myself, because like I say, I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been a laborer most of my life, and I've owned business. The problem that I see, the area that I think you might need a little bit more clarity is, as much as you definitely need, like I say, the person that comes up with the idea, as much as a genius they are, without that idea being put into fruition, which requires, the division of labor, at the end of the day, there has to be an acknowledgement and respect to the fact that without that individual, because no, you can't point to any collective and you cannot point to any group that come up with all the things that separate us from, the Neanderthals in the past, where we were living in caves, and just hunting wild animals or living off the land. What has brought us forward from that point to now, right? And I think we would all acknowledge we don't all want to live under a state of nature, because as much as nature can be beautiful, it can also be very violent towards human beings. So we got to always acknowledge, as much as, yes, the laboring class, the division of work and labor, that those people are very important, but there should be no such thing as this concept of they are the only thing, because without the original inventor, without the original individual that come up and conceived or derived those ideas or those business models in their mind, we wouldn't even have anything. There would be nothing for the division of labor to do. Like, without the original idea, the fact that even us today, that we can communicate even though we're thousands of miles away, it's beautiful that, and it's taken thousands, tens of thousands, probably ultimately hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people to have that division of labor, to bring our modern infrastructure and technology to the forefront where we can do what we do. But if it wasn't for the person that derived and conceived of the very idea of the computer and invention of all the parts that comprise a computer, this is the part, like I say, which is why I think this is the biggest part where we can help each other, is instead of looking at it has to be one or the other, the capitalist, the inventor, the creator, the individual, and the division of labor, like the collective or the group that brings it all to fruition. There should not be any pretense where one has to be sacrificed at the cost of the other. This is what part where, like I say, we need each other. The working class, as much as they might pretend, and I mean, like even myself, I'll say, listen, as much as I agree with a lot of things that are from the working class and, going against the corporates or the elites or those who constantly keep our wages stagnated or constantly steal and plunder our wealth, I'm all on board with you there. But I also have to acknowledge and recognize that I'm only able to say what I got to say and talk to you by the fact that there are beautiful, amazing, intellectual individuals that took it upon themselves to not just create the idea, but to figure out a way to put that idea into a business model. And of course, they required the help of the laboring class to bring their idea to fruition. But it was the idea itself that was the very basis, the very platform, the very springboard that has allowed everything else to flourish. And I'm very, like, I should make this more important than I even do in a lot of my videos. We have to be appreciative of the fact that there are people that have done so many things that have created our ability to live inside warm, comfortable homes instead of living in caves. So it should not be a matter of choice. To me, it's not. It should never be a matter of we've got to choose capitalism or socialism. It should be a matter of allowing the free market of ideas, whether you're talking about socially or economically, allowing the free market, because the free market basically just represents free people. Market is just people. There's no such thing as a market like government market. Well, that's fascism. So a free market is just free people. So just allow free people to have the ability to have freedom of choice and freedom of association. And those, like I say, if the people that recognize there are these evil crony capitalists or these corporations that are using government or regulatory capture as a means to suppress any external influences or competition in the business model, because this is what we see today. In Canada, we only have basically 2 or 3 telecom companies that screw us over on a continual basis. But if we actually had real free market capitalism, if we had an actual free market in Canada, they would never be able to do what they do, because there would be someone, well, put it this way, I'm just one person, but if we had a free market, I would be one of those people that I would come up with a great business model to be able to offer a product or service at a lot better price and give people more competition, and it would destroy these crony corporations' business model in a minute. It would be they would lose their monopoly on the ability to control what price we pay for the products and services we use, because there would be competition. And there's never been any time in my life, and I bet you there's never been any time in your life that you can suggest where if there wasn't the ability for someone else to step in and offer a better product or service at a better price point, and even though they might be doing it, like even if I said I was doing it for my own selfish reasons, let's say I was just a capitalist that just wanted to create a business that was profitable to me, the only way I would be able to do so, and people that would want to come to use my business, would be if I could do it, like I say, and offer them something better at a better price point, maybe higher quality than my competition. So competition has always been the means where we can elevate and raise each other, whether it's intellectually, socially, economically, or even in our sports venues or every endeavor we've ever undertaken as human beings. The only way we've actually achieved higher amounts of success is through competition. So people that are anti-competition is actually, it's like, I don't even know how you can call yourself a progressive, because that's what people on the left side of the political spectrum like to call themselves. They're progressive. Well, if you're progressive, you have to promote competition, because competition is the only thing that's ever progressed humanity in every area of, like I say, social or economics.
I can definitely see where you're coming from. In this case, Ace. Oh, so is there anything else you'd like to ask me? Is there anything else specific you want me to ask about? You want to ask me about?
Oh, yeah. Well, since I've been doing a lot of the talking, if you want to take this time right now to just go on, like whatever you want to say, and just go on, and I'll let you go. It's totally up to you. It's your, like I say, I don't want to. I have a tendency, as you can tell, I can talk a lot. I could basically talk for hours. so if you want, you can go ahead and just take over the conversation and say whatever you've got to say, and I'll just wait till you're done and say anything. I think I basically covered a lot of the stuff that I wanted to point out. But like I say, the biggest thing to me when we're having these conversations is I want to hear like what your ideas and well, I mean, the biggest reason I guess is when you say. I think the clarity of the language would be helpful as far as when you said, because you said you wanted to leave classical liberalism and the right, but when you said that, it's like, well, wait a minute. Just because some people today are, because of this weird politics thing where you have these strange bedfellows now. This is the problem with all this, tricking or manipulating the language, because nobody even knows what each other really represents, because they're creating their own defined meanings of the word. So like when people say about people on the right. Now, someone today, like I even heard you suggest, like that Jordan Peterson, you consider that he would be on the right. But in reality, it's only because the political landscape and sophistry, that the political opportunists has completely distorted the English language to the point where now they can point to, a lot of them will point to someone like Jordan Peterson and suggest he's on the right. But in reality, if you understand what he points out as far as like social and economics, he is literally a classical liberal. And a classical liberal would have been considered dominantly on the left. Now, if you had your like your right wingers, as far as some of your Austrian economists or people from the Austria, German, Hungary bent, those people might very well have been someone that would have been considered maybe right leaning. But it was the area of their social development that was different. The reason why classical liberals are so aligned with libertarians today, because what a libertarian does properly, because a philosophical libertarian is what you do is, because everything is about, like I say, the non-aggression principle and private property, like property rights, self-ownership, is you take the good from all ideologies, just like with Marxism, right? Like Marxism, socialism, communism, capitalism, democracy. What you can do is, as a libertarian or a critical thinker, is you just take what are the areas of their philosophy that is universally consistent morally and can be put into practice in everybody's life without inflicting any harm socially or economically to someone else. So in the old classical sense of liberalism, the area where I think we have progressed much better today is they would have been considered more socially conservative compared to some of the thinkers of today. But the thinkers of today that would identify on the left, they've basically just expanded on that classical liberalism idea in the social realm. Whereas people that would be on the right side of the realm as far as economics, they took the classical liberal ideas and they expanded them out into the economic realm. So today, a classical liberal back in 1800 wouldn't have been for gay marriage, but they were about individual rights and freedoms. So really what we're talking about is a libertarian endeavor, or even anyone that cares about individual rights, is just expand on the freedoms that we understand that are inherent and inalienable. So if we're to suggest, as a liberal, if you're to suggest that people should have the right of freedom to associate, well then just by sheer extension of that, as long as they're not using force, well, you can be like that perfectly aligns if you're LGBT or Q or any of these identifiers as far as genders or sex preferences. That's completely aligned with what classical liberalism meant. So just because we're expanding, like what libertarianism today represents, as far as I'm concerned, is we've taken the great ideas of the classical liberals, maybe some on the right, like some of the Austrian economists, because that's the other thing with the classical liberalism, as far as the economics understand, is you don't get to steal from people. That was the removal of the subjecting the individual to the collective. So in economic terms, it may seem like a right-leaning area for people to say that, oh, I'm a capitalist and I'm against socialism, but it's not. It's a moral statement. It shouldn't be a political statement, even though people use it for the political means, and they'll try to bring this into the political realm. But if you're against theft, then you just have to expand that out to your social and economic environment completely. So a libertarian today says, okay, forget about the 1800 classical liberals that were still allowing for the suppression of LGBTQ or minority groups, and even allowed for some forms of slavery. Let's just be morally consistent in our ethics. So a libertarian saying, well, okay, if you're a liberal and you suggest you care about social and economic rights, well, then you better expand that out to allow for LGBT or other people that would be considered a minority group. So it's just, to me, it's about clarity of language. Whether you want to identify on the right or left, that just means when someone says right or left, that's just telling me that you want to delve into the political realm. And the political realm, once again, is just people want to use their opinions, except their opinions are backed by force. Me and you, because we're not in the political realm, we're just two people talking, you can tell me whatever your ideas or what your opinions or preferences are, and I'm not concerned with you because you're just someone that wants to live your life freely as you see fit. And because I am a libertarian and I'm a live, let live kind of person, I say, hey, you should be able to do so. You don't get to force me to pay for it, but hey, if you want to do it, you should be allowed to do it. So that's, I think, the part that we can expand upon. And if someone, like, even if people like yourself, you want to come up with a whole new term, create a whole new thing, maybe start a whole new movement, and not even use the term libertarianism, as long as, because that's the thing, maybe you might not want to identify with everything that a libertarian stands for, although I don't understand how anyone could, per se, because like I said, it's basically just two tenets of property rights, self-ownership, and the non-aggression principle. I don't know how anyone would want to go against that. But if you want to identify as someone else, or as with a whole new ideology or a way of doing things, I say go for it. As long as we all adhere to the fact that I don't get to impose my will on you and you don't get to impose your will on me, I think we can always move forward and be able to live peacefully and harmoniously with each other.
I think I can agree with that. Now, since you've given me the chance to do a lot of the talking, I think I should clear up what my current views are for your audience. And because I know there's a certain rebel radio out there who has been smearing me. Currently, my views are what are in line with what could be considered a left libertarian, which is essentially, and what that means is that I am for the core concept of what a libertarian is in terms of social and civic policy, but I've sort of leaned towards left wing or leftist economics but I don't care that much about economics. For me, the social policy of upholding social liberty, the freedom of the individual, to me, that is the most important element of my philosophy. And at the moment, I am in the process where I should be looking at the works of other similarly minded thinkers. I privately joke that I am now some sort of anarchist, but I'm not entirely willing to declare myself an anarchist just yet, because I want to know what I'm doing, basically. I want to be able to argue for whatever position that I'm on confidently. I have people like Pierre Joseph Proudhon, Pierre Kropotkin on my reading list, and there is a website called the Center for a Stateless Society that I am interested in reading. But basically, that's where my political development is.
Well, that's great. Like I say, I the beautiful thing about I think you'll find this, at least with those of us, and I can only, like I say, I don't talk about libertarians as a collective, which is why I talk about the ideas of libertarian, because I understand that there are some libertarians or people that identify with many different political or philosophical leanings, but then they don't represent them properly. So, when you're talking about these things, I would say it's really important to kind of stay on the actual topics of the ideas than the people, because like I say, I'm almost 100% certain I could find areas where I would have disagreements with everyone that you brought up in your video, whether it's Rubin or Sargon Akkad, Jordan Peterson, but ultimately
Crowder, definitely. I brought him up.
Or Crowder, yeah, for sure, Crowder. Well, the one thing I've always found that's most disturbing to me with people that identify on the right, because Crowder is not he uses the term libertarian loosely, but in reality, he identifies, you would say, a conservative. And the problem I've always had with conservatives, which is, once again, you have to delve into the political realm, the political fray, is they talk about being for limited or small government, but the two main areas they focus their attention on is the military and the police, which is literally those are the two institutions that enforce the state. So if you're all about promoting the enforcers of the state, well then how can you really be about individual rights or freedom? Because it is literally those enforcers of the state.
You can, if you really think about it.
Yeah, to me, it's a weird, it's a crazy contradiction, and why trust me, I get just as much backlash from people on the right side of the spectrum, because when I talk about freedoms, like I say, I talk about them from the philosophical aspect and making sure they're universally and morally consistent. So I have right-leaning people that will always attack me every time, I'll show. I made a video actually about we had since 2000 in Canada we had 462 murders from cops that murdered people, and out of those 462 cases, only 2 of them have ever been convicted, and the 2 that have been convicted are actually still before the courts and going through the appeals process. So as a precedent today in Canada, 460 murders by police, people that died as a result. I shouldn't necessarily say murders because that's a presumption of guilt, but there was 460 people that were killed at the hands of police, and not one of them has ever been charged with an actual crime. Now, you could make the excuse or the pretense that, oh, well, most cops are good, but to suggest that they're 100% always in the right, this is an area, like I say, but this is the problem that I've always had with people, well, whether they come from the right or left. If you're in the position of authority, and your authority is built on mysticism, which is basically what government is you need a class of people that are so indoctrinated into the faith, the religion of statism, that they will protect their masters even if they come from the political left or the political right. So the left don't promote the cops, but the cops, if you were to go against the political left, the cops would still be there to defend them. If you go against the right, it's still the enforcing class that's still going to protect the ruling class. So yeah, I'm totally with you, especially those of you, anyone out there that's listening to this video, if you're on the left side of the spectrum, like I said, I'm consistent. I don't care. I'm all about ideas. I'm not all about political ideology or dogma. So I'm against the right-leaning people as far as politics as I am against the left. The biggest difference I notice is the people on the right seem to predominantly want to control my social habits, whereas the people on the left want to control my economic habits, or how those interactions or transactions occur. Whereas I'm all about, I don't want anybody to control my social or economic habits. I should be a free human being, that if I'm doing anything socially, so like I say, whether you're an LGBT or you're a minority or a Muslim or anybody, if whatever you're doing in your personal life, in your social life, or even on the economic end of the scale, whatever you're doing, as long as you're doing it with voluntary interaction, people enter into your contract socially or economically voluntarily, and they're willing to do so, then to me, I'm a live, let live kind of person. It's when you get into the political realm, because the political realm, like I say, it's that one area in all of our existence, whether you're in Canada, the US, or the US, it's that political realm is that one area where the ideas are used, the end result of the idea is force. And that's the part that I reject completely, which is where I share a lot of commonalities with people that identify as anarchists. Because I don't believe, even though I have different ideas and preferences, I don't think I should have any right to be able to use the power of government to force my ideas on other people. So I think, like I say, I think the ultimate thing, and we can tie this video up after you respond, but I think, like I say, once again, the biggest thing that we should get to is, if we're all about voluntary choice and individual freedom, then we should at least be able to all come together and discuss these ideas without fear of the fact that I'm trying to control you. Like, I can tell you this with 100% certainty. I will never enter into the political realm as a means to try to control what you do socially or economically. And if you're willing to do the same for all, if we can make this conversation, large enough in scope and enough of us can get on board, well, like I say, we can actually, without doing anything, there doesn't even have to be a revolution. I have a picture that I have on my screen right now that I come up with a little thing back in the day. It's true liberty requires evolution, not revolution. And evolution means if we can get our intellect so that we now function as adults instead of in this quasi-teenage realm where we still feel like we're free individuals, but we still feel like we have to function under some ruler. If we can get to the adult portion of humanity if we can evolve to that point intellectually and start dealing with each other socially and economically, voluntarily, and using disruptive means, like whether it's, these cryptocurrencies or anything else people come up with, if we can do these things where that we can expand our voluntary interactions, not just personally and socially, but into the political realm, and take that area out of the equation so we're not using force against each other, then we don't have to revolt and have violent civil wars. In Canada, there's only a few hundred politicians. And in the UK, I'm sure there's still only a few hundred politicians. You know what? These bunch of old, frail politicians, they can't do a damn thing to us if we all say, I don't recognize your authority, and we're going to live in spite of your wish to rule over us. We can ignore these people out of existence. And the people that we really have to reach to the most, obviously, are those who are the enforcers, which is why I find it important. This is where I do rail against the right, because those are the ones that seem to want to always defend the enforcers, because it's the enforcers at the end of the day that are going to prevent us from bringing about true individual freedom and liberty.
Yeah, I actually do agree with that sentiment. I actually do agree with your sentiment when you think about it. I don't want people to assume that I'm the person who's like revolution now. Like I'm the sort of person who doesn't actually want it to come to a revolution, even though I have this gut feeling that at some point soon it might be necessary. Like my view is, like, I would ideally like things to go the way that you would like them to. But on the other hand, if revolution, it turns out to be the only way to basically preserve whatever of our liberty is left, then I personally don't see any other option.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I expect that's a definite potential, because humans have this curious and crazy habit of repeating the same mistakes, because it only takes, like a century or two, and then enough generations are far enough removed from understanding how detrimental revolutions can be, that they forget just how. And once you start down that road, once you start down that revolutionary pursuit, then yeah, it can be very dangerous. Well, I mean, just in the 20th century alone, 100 plus million people died as a consequence. So I'm like you, I'm pragmatic. I understand that it is a very real potential, and as much as like you or I would love, hey, if it was just you or I, then we could probably come to some way to stave off that, because we're, obviously individuals that have respect for each other, our individuality, and not trying to force or impose our ideas on each other. But we do have to recognize that that's just us. There are people that are going to constantly try to impose their will and their ideas on us. So the one thing I will say that's kind of good about the revolutionaries is, just like in areas where there are people that have threatened me in life, most of the time, you don't even actually have to be violent. You just have to flex your muscle. And this is the part where the revolutionaries, those on the left, hey, I'm with you. You want to flex your muscle? You want to say, I'm tired of being ruled over by a bunch of, crony corporatists and central planning hacks? I'm with you there. But we all have to at least get on board with, if you want to flex your muscle, that's fine, but you got to make sure you have a focus on where your muscle, like where you're flexing, like just know who your true enemy is. Don't fall for the identity politics bullshit where they're trying to divvy us up into these subcategories where we got to hate each other. I think we all should at least recognize that it's those in government and individuals that run these corporations that maybe lobby government to get bailed out, so to steal the people, or to use regulatory caption to control or dictate our habits or behaviors. Just at least focus on the individuals who are truly responsible. Don't ever turn it into a collective. So let's like I say, it doesn't matter if you're a communist, socialist, capitalist. Don't say, okay, I'm a capitalist, therefore, if you're identified as socialist, I have to conceive or perceive you as an enemy. Because if you do that, then you've destroyed any potential for a good outcome, and it'll only turn into like a violent revolution. But if you point to an actual individual that there is proof that they are actually looking to use politics and the government as a means to economically or socially enslave you, then those individuals are the ones that you need to focus your attention on. Don't just because, just like with socialists, don't look at someone that owns a business or a corporation and say, oh, well, they're a corporation, so therefore I must hate them. No, because we're all individuals. There are lots of people that are just good people that we all have to function in this fucked up world that we're living in today. And just because some people have had to find some area where they've had to let a little bit of their principles die so that they can function in this modern world doesn't mean that they're inherently bad or immoral people. Just focus on, like I say, the easiest one is the political realm. Because like I say, a corporation, as much as there's a lot of dipshit morons and idiots in these corporations, at the end of the day, Sears or, Walmart, none of these people have any pretense of authority over us. So we can go against them together. Because like I say, there is no pretense that we're not allowed to oppose a corporation. What we do have is the perception that we're not allowed to oppose the government. So just recognize that it's those in government, those who want to centrally plan, dictate, and control your life. Those are the ultimate culprits.
Okay, now I'd like to end here because I have got to have dinner soon where I live. And it's about 20 to 6 where I live, and I'm responsible for prepping dinner.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. No, this is perfect. I think we had a great conversation. And like I say, if there's any time in the future you want to do this again, I'm more than willing to do so, because that's what I'm all about. Is I'm trying to reach out to basically anybody and discuss these ideas. Like I say, we gotta kind of rise above the fray of talking about, just what other people's personal preferences or opinions are, and just talk about and discuss the ideas, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's the ideas that matters most. And as long as we're all willing to listen to each other's idea and have that live, let live mentality without trying to impose our will or our mandates or our edicts on each other, then I think we can all come to terms, and we'll be able to hopefully, this is just a hope, doesn't mean it's going to happen, but hopefully, like I say, we can have an intellectual evolution instead of another revolution, and hopefully we can advance humanity past some of these paradigms that we've experienced in the past. So it's been a great chat with you, Severin. So this was a great conversation with Severin. Hopefully we'll do it again someday. Look forward to having this video up. I should have it up within probably 4 or 5 days. It's the Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.